Roy Moore's honest, and Moore's his own man. Moore fears God, stands for the Constitution, fights for what is right, and believes what we believe. Drain the swamp. Send McConnell a message. Send them all a message. Roy Moore, Senate.
Republican primary in Alabama is in the race for Jeff Sessions' old Senate seat, is providing a fascinating window into the state of GOP base voters 200 days into the Trump presidency. Two of the top three candidates have repeatedly attacked the Republican leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell. And despite polls showing that President Trump is losing support nationally, even among his core supporters, all three GOP candidates have been battling over who is the most pro-Trump. Leading the pack, according to a new poll, is Roy Moore, who, as the Alabama Chief Justice, refused to remove a giant Ten Commandments monument for the state judicial meeting. And last year defied the Supreme Court decision to allow same-sex marriages, leading to his suspension from the bench. Joining me now, Morgan State University professor Jason Johnson, politics editor of The Root, Betsy Woodruff, politics reporter at The Daily Beast. My sense, Betsy, is that the conservative... That there is a lot of energy putting into Luther Strange coming from Mitch McConnell, a lot of energy being put into Mo Brooks coming from the sort of conservative media, and they all don't want Roy Moore, but that may be what the voters want.
Right. Roy Moore has had widespread national and state-level name ID for decades almost, I think. The interesting thing about this is that Donald Trump has sort of become the Washington establishment. That's the weird thing about looking at some of the campaign ads that are getting run in this primary. You have Mitch McConnell basically trying to connect Trump to his preferred candidate, something that would have been almost laughable a year and a half ago. The other interesting thing is that Roy Moore and Mo Brooks have a really fascinating commonality, which is that both of them are conservative Christians, and both of them during the presidential campaign were really uncomfortable with being closely associated with Trump. Mo Brooks actually called Trump, I believe, a serial adulterer. I think that's the term that he used. Roy Moore also throughout much of the campaign really stiff-armed Trump, and now you have Luther Strange, the establishment candidate, criticizing these two conservative as possible Christian men for not being close enough to Trump. It shows how much Trump has really made conservative evangelical Christians very uncomfortable.
Well, right. Although he's now he's sort of taken over, right? Because now they're forced to pledge their fealty. I thought these numbers were fascinating, Jason, of approval ratings. Moore is at 53-34. Strange is 35-50 underwater. Brooks is at 31-43. Mo Brooks is as conservative as basically you can get in the United States House of Representatives. That appears to not overcome the fact that he is tainted by Washington in the eyes of the primary voter.
Well, yeah, Chris. I mean, so much of this is about cultural arguments. I feel sorry for just mainline Republicans in Alabama who just want a free market conservative, who wants to shrink the government, who wants to make sure the markets work fine, because they're getting these culture warriors. And it's like a choice between like Voldemort and Cersei Lannister. Like, all these guys are pretty terrible when it comes to just the core issues of governing. But instead, they want to get into these sort of larger war on facts, war on culture sort of arguments. And I'll be honest with you, even if, and it looks like right now the polls are going very well for Roy Moore, if Roy Moore gets into the Senate, he will be the kind of loud firebrand that the Republican Party needs to be concerned about. This is a guy who is, it's not just the anti-gay rights, it's not just that he didn't support changing anti-desegregation language in the Alabama Constitution. He is someone who has basically said, my personal belief in God supersedes the laws of the land. And that's not somebody that I think a real Republican Party, including Reince Priebus, really wants.
Well, that's precisely why I find this so fascinating, Betsy, is that there's some sense in which Donald Trump was this kind of perfect storm. He was anomalous. There were all these reasons that he won the primary. But Roy Moore kind of is that right now in this primary. And to me, his popularity shows that the base hasn't lost its appetite for that kind of figure.
It also shows how much Republican Party politics are just extraordinarily local, and how hard it is to make widespread national generalizations about what the Trump base looks like and what those voters want. Your typical Trump voter in central Pennsylvania or in northeast Wisconsin is going to think about politics very differently than one of your Trump voters in Alabama. And that's why some of these candidates, there seems to be real dissonance in terms of the way Trump acts versus the way your Roy Moore Moore types act. Trump really is unusual in that he brought this New York Republican style of politics into the Republican Party. For most of the last 20 years or so, New York Republicans have not been particularly powerful, right? Socially moderate types, folks who are not very open or very aggressive about their religious faith. That's the antithesis of George W. Bush. It's also the antithesis of your Roy Moore types. And it's interesting seeing the resurrection almost of the Bible Belt Republican in the era of the a-religious Republican.
There's more news today that I thought was related to this, which is that Dean Heller, who's the one Republican representing a Republican senator representing a state Hillary won, who's up in 2018 of Nevada. He got a primary challenger. This is Danny Tarkanian, who's the son of the very famous former UNLV coach, who's run a bunch of times, 6 times I think, hasn't won yet. But that is part of the mechanism of ideological enforcement that produces the politics we have. Is, Jason, it seems to me, precisely that kind of primary challenge, which is always waiting in the wings.
Right. And you have to be careful because, you know, who's inside, who's outside, and who's considered ideologically pure. I mean, that goalpost is getting a speeding ticket. It just seems to keep moving, depending on who happens to be running. I mean, you think about it, Mo Brooks is out there defending Jeff Sessions. At one point, Jeff Sessions was a favored son of the state, and now that's got him in 3rd place. So I think Alabama, you're right. We can't necessarily derive too much from it because that is pure, distilled, crystalline Trump supporters. I don't know if that's necessarily reflective of how his supporters are going to be in other states heading into 2018.
It does seem to me, Betsy, though, that there is that Republican politicians are watching all of this very carefully as they make their calculations.
Without a doubt. I think what's interesting about Mo Brooks is that he's very much the Alabama version of Ted Cruz. And in a way, this initial primary contest is going to be, to an extent, a referendum on whether or not Ted Cruz Republicans can compete in Donald Trump's world. There's basically zero daylight between what Mo Brooks pushes for in the House and what Ted Cruz pushes for in the Senate. If Alabama Republicans reject him, that will be more broadly a repudiation of the Heritage Action Cruz project.
And mark my words, if it's Luther Strange and Roy Moore in a runoff, Roy Moore could absolutely be a United States Senator. Jason Johnson and Betsy Woodruff, thank you both.